Imagine dedicating your life to someone else's dream, a dream so brilliant it casts a shadow over everything else, hiding your own heart behind the clang of pans and the heat of the past. Elena Rostova lived this reality every single day in the celebrated kitchen of Aperture, working beside the culinary demigod, executive chef Julian Vance, watching the man she secretly loved from across the stainless steel divide. But what happens when the weight of an unspoken love becomes too much to bear and a single sentence shatters a perfectly plated world? Before we dive into this intellectual and emotional odyssey, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The ticket machine spat out its final order of the night. Elena's notice, scrawled on a piece of parchment paper, sat on Julian's prep station like an unseasoned, unwelcome dish. The last rays of evening sun filtered through the clear story windows of the dining room, casting long, dramatic shadows across the gleaming copper pots and polished concrete floors of Aperture's hallowed kitchen. Elena Rostova stood before Julian Vance's station, a resignation letter held tightly in her hand, the paper crinkling with the force of her grip. 5 years of arriving before the sun, of staying long after the last customer had gone, of anticipating Julian's every culinary impulse before he'd even conceived it. 5 years of stolen glances over the sizzle of the plancha, of brushing hands while plating a delicate dish, of pretending her heart didn't seize every time Julian said her name in that low, intense voice, a voice that could coax perfection from a piece of fish or sear a line cook with a single word. Elena placed the letter on his cutting board. The sound of the paper against the wood was barely audible over the hum of the cooling walk-in, yet it felt like a thunderclap in the sudden stillness of the post-service kitchen. Chef, he didn't look up from the delicate task of tweezing microgreens onto a final dessert plate. He never did when he was in the zone, a state of hyper-focus that had earned him 3 Michelin stars and a reputation for being more artist than cook. His dark hair was damp with sweat, clinging to his temples, yet he moved with an unnerving grace, his entire being concentrated on the plate before him. The stark white of his chef's coat was a canvas for the occasional artful smudge of a sauce, a testament to a night of brutal, beautiful work. Elena had memorized every detail of Julian's service persona over the past 5 years. The way he'd tap his knife against the board when an idea was forming. The way he'd close his eyes for a fraction of a second when tasting a new sauce, completely surrendering to the flavor. The way his gray eyes, usually stormy and critical, would flash with a rare, brilliant light when a dish came together exactly as he'd envisioned. "The inventory is done," Elena said, her voice steady, professional, a perfect imitation of the thousands of other end-of-night reports she'd given him. It gave no hint of the hurricane tearing through her. "The produce order for tomorrow is confirmed, and I've briefed the morning prep team on the new menu changes." Still, he didn't look up, but his hand paused, the tweezers hovering over a single, perfect raspberry. Something in her tone was different, final. After 5 years of working in the intimate, high-pressure dance of a world-class kitchen, Julian had learned to read Elena's moods like a recipe. This felt like a dish that was about to break. Julian finally looked up, his piercing gray eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the world fell away, and it was just the two of them, the air thick with unspoken things. Then Elena's gaze dropped to the floor. Even that fleeting contact sent a jolt through her, a painful reminder of why she had to do this. Her throat felt tight, raw. She had rehearsed this speech 100 times, standing over her own stove at 3 a.m., practicing the words until they felt foreign and meaningless. "And this," she said, nodding toward the parchment paper. The letter looked so small, so insignificant, yet it held the power to detonate her entire world. Julian stared at it, his expression unreadable. The mask of the executive chef firmly in place. That mask was a masterpiece of control, honed during services from hell, during the brutal reviews, during every moment when showing emotion meant showing a weakness his competitors would devour. "What is it?" he asked. His voice clipped. "My notice." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the smoke from a grill fire that had been hastily extinguished. Julian's hand froze completely for a long, stretched-out moment. The only sound was the rhythmic dripping of a recently washed pan and the distant clatter of dishes from the scullery. "Notice." He repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it for the first time, trying to identify its components, to see if he could alter its meaning by deconstructing it. Effective when? Immediately. Elena had planned this part carefully. She had to be clinical, swift, a clean cut. She had planned to say her piece, thank him for the opportunity, and walk out of Aperture with her professional dignity intact. She hadn't planned for the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, or the way his gray eyes searched her face as if looking for a miscalculation, a flaw in her logic he could correct. "I see." He set the tweezers down with deliberate, chilling precision and picked up the letter, but he didn't read it. His fingers traced the edge of the parchment. "May I ask why?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Because I love you. Because I dream of the way you talk about food, and I imagine you talking about me that way. Because watching you with other women, even for a fleeting moment, feels like swallowing broken glass. Because every time you praise my work, I want it to be about more than my work. Because staying here is a slow, exquisite torture, and leaving feels like severing a limb. But at least it will be a clean break." "Personal reasons," she said instead, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Julian's laugh was a short, sharp, humorless sound like a knife hitting a steel table. "Personal reasons. After 5 years of 80-hour weeks, after building this kitchen with me, after becoming the only person I trust on the line, personal reasons is all I get." "Yes, chef." She forced herself to meet his gaze. Those eyes had seen her through her worst mistakes and her greatest triumphs in the kitchen. They had watched her with approval, with frustration, with rare, shared amusement, but never, not once, with the warmth she so desperately craved. "That's all I can give you." Julian stood up slowly, his tall frame seeming to fill the entire kitchen, his presence as commanding as the blast of heat from a wood-fired oven. He walked to the pass, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him like a general surveying a lost battle. Elena watched the taut line of his shoulders under the white coat, the way the dimming light caught the silver threads at his temples. She burned the image into her memory, knowing it might be the last time she would ever see him like this, in his element, in their world. "I could make you stay," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper against the hum of the refrigerators. "Your contract requires a 60-day notice period." "You could try," she replied, her voice just as quiet, but laced with a resolve that surprised even her. Julian turned around, and for a fleeting second, Elena saw a crack in his perfect, composed facade. Confusion, maybe. Hurt, even. It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it, but that glimpse of vulnerability made her chest ache with a fresh wave of pain. "Elena." His voice was softer now, the title chef gone, leaving just her name, a name that suddenly felt dangerously intimate. He took a step closer, and she caught the faint scent of smoke, saffron, and something that was uniquely him. If this is about the review from the Chronicle, about the pressure, about the hours, it's not about the work, then what is it about? Elena closed her eyes, searching for a strength she didn't possess. When she opened them, he was closer still, close enough for her to see the tiny, exhausted lines around his eyes, close enough for her to feel the energy radiating from him, the same intense energy that powered the entire restaurant. I can't tell you, can't or won't both. He studied her face for a long moment, and Elena felt completely exposed, as if he could see right through her chef's whites to the raw, bleeding heart beneath. Julian had always been able to read people, to understand their base ingredients, their flavor profiles, but Elena had spent 5 years perfecting her own recipe for composure, for being the perfect, indispensable sous chef and nothing more. Fine. His voice went cold again, the professional chill returning like a blast from the freezer. The walls were back up, the mask of the untouchable chef sliding perfectly into place. The business manager will process your exit. You can clear out your locker. Elena nodded. The coldness of his tone, a familiar, painful embrace. She had expected this, the return of the Ice King, the emotional distance he used as a shield. It still felt like a physical blow. Thank you for the opportunity, Chef. Chef, not Julian. The formality was a final, painful plating of the distance between them. Elena. His voice stopped her as she reached the kitchen door, her hand trembling on a cool metal handle. Whatever this is about, he said, his voice flat, unreadable. I hope you find what you're looking for. Her throat closed. She wanted to turn around to scream the truth, to tell him everything, to throw away 5 years of caution and kiss him with all the desperate longing she kept locked away. Instead, she whispered, I hope so too. She walked out without looking back, past the prep stations where she'd meticulously crafted thousands of dishes, past the walk-in where they'd once been trapped for 5 minutes in a comical moment of shared panic, past the pass where he had just once, smiled at her in a way that had made her feel like the sun had come out just for her. The walk down the back alley behind the restaurant felt like an eternity. Each step took her further away from the only life she'd known, the man she loved, the future she had never been brave enough to claim. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her roommate, Chloe. How did it go? Are you alive? Elena stared at the screen, the words blurring through her tears. How could she explain that she had just voluntarily ended her career? How could she explain that staying would have meant slowly burning to ash, but leaving felt like being flayed alive? She typed back, it's done. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Come home. I've got cheap wine and a vat of mac and cheese, the holy grail of culinary heartbreak recovery. Elena almost smiled. Chloe always knew. The alley opened onto the street, the sounds of the city a jarring contrast to the focused quiet of the kitchen. Elena had navigated this city every day for 5 years, but tonight it felt alien, hostile. The world kept moving, indifferent to the fact that her own had just imploded. Her phone buzzed again, an email from the restaurant's business manager. Her exit was already being processed. Julian was nothing if not efficient, even when dismantling his own kitchen, his own life. She hailed a cab, the city lights blurring past the window into a meaningless smear of color. She allowed herself one last thought of Julian, the way he looked when he was lost in thought, a piece of charcoal in his hand, sketching a new dish on parchment paper, the way he had once gently corrected her grip on a knife, his hand covering hers for a fraction of a second, sending fire up her arm, the way he had said her name just now, soft and confused and almost caring. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the cab window and finally let herself break. Back in the silent, empty kitchen, Julian stood at the pass, staring at the spot where Elena had been. He unfolded the parchment paper with hands that felt unsteady, a foreign sensation for a man whose entire career depended on precision and control. Chef Vance, it began, formal, cold. Please accept this as formal notice of my resignation from the position of sous chef, effective immediately. Thank you for the invaluable opportunities for professional growth during my time at Aperture. I wish you and the restaurant continued success. Sincerely, Elena Rostova. That was it. 5 years, 100,000 hours of shared pressure and creation, reduced to 4 sterile sentences. No real explanation, no hint of the easy camaraderie that had grown between them in the heat of service, the shorthand they had developed, the way they could communicate an entire paragraph with a single look. Julian crumpled the letter in his fist, then, just as quickly, smoothed it out again. He read it 3 more times, searching for a hidden ingredient, a subtext, a clue that would explain why his right hand, the only person in the world who understood his culinary vision without explanation, had just amputated herself from his life. Personal reasons. He had built his reputation on understanding the nuances of flavor, on breaking down complex profiles into their component part. He could taste a sauce and tell you not just what was in it, but where the ingredients were from and how long they had been aged. But Elena had always been a more complex dish, harder to deconstruct, more genuine than the critics and sycophants who usually populated his world. Maybe that was why losing her felt like losing a part of his own palate, a part of himself he hadn't even realized was essential until it was gone. His phone buzzed, the sound sharp and intrusive in the quiet kitchen. "Chef, the reservation system is down for tomorrow's service." Julian straightened his coat, his reflection a pale, grim mask in the polished steel of the countertop. He was the executive chef again, but as he walked toward his office to deal with the latest crisis, he couldn't shake the feeling that the most fundamental ingredient in his carefully constructed life had just been removed, and he had no idea how to replace it. The night was a blur of logistical nightmares and damage control. The reservation system crash was a minor annoyance, but without Elena, every small problem felt magnified, every task more difficult. Julian found himself reaching for the phone to call her, to ask her a question, to rely on her encyclopedic knowledge of their suppliers and systems, only to remember she was gone. He stayed until the early hours of the morning, fixing the system himself, driven by a restless, anxious energy. He didn't want to go home to his empty, minimalist apartment, a space as carefully curated and devoid of personal warmth as one of his plate. At 4 a.m., he finally locked up the restaurant and walked out into the silent city. He found himself walking not toward his home, but in the opposite direction, toward the small neighborhood where he knew Elena lived. He didn't know her address, but he knew the area, had dropped her off once after a particularly brutal New Year's Eve service when no cabs were available. He stood on a street corner, the sky beginning to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple, and stared at the rows of brownstones. She was in one of them, sleeping, or maybe like him, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. The thought of her with someone else, of her laughing and sharing her life with another person, sent a sharp, unfamiliar pang through his chest. He dismissed it as frustration, the anger of a chef who had lost his most valuable asset. But deep down, in a place he rarely dared to look, he knew it was something more, something that terrified him more than a bad review from the Times ever could. 6 months later, Julian Vance stood in the bustling chaos of the Union Square Green Market, feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. He rarely came here himself. That was what his sous chefs were for. But his current sous chef, a talented but uninspired cook from a celebrated kitchen in Chicago, lacked Elena's palate, her intuition. He didn't trust him to select the first heirloom tomatoes of the season, a task Elena had performed with an almost religious reverence. Julian shook his head, pushing away the ghost that had haunted his kitchen for half a year. He grabbed a handful of wild arugula, its peppery scent a sharp clean note in the humid summer air. His mind was already back. The restaurant planning the dish, the plating, the precise temperature of the fish it would accompany. The market was a symphony of sounds and smells. Farmers hawking their produce, the sweet scent of ripe peaches mingling with the earthy smell of fresh soil, the chatter of shoppers, and the distant sound of a street musician's saxophone. Julian moved through the crowd with his usual focused intensity, a shark in a sea of minnows, drawing curious glances but making no contact. He was reaching for a basket of purple asparagus when he heard it, a laugh, a bright, uninhibited sound that sliced through the market's noise and made him freeze, his hand hovering in mid-air. Julian knew that laugh. He had heard it on rare occasions, echoing in the kitchen after a particularly smooth service, had seen it transform her usually serious face, had treasured it like a rare, perfect ingredient he could never quite replicate. He turned slowly, his heart beginning a heavy, unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs, and there she was. Elena Rostova was standing 3 stalls down by a vendor selling artisanal cheeses, laughing at something a tall man with a friendly, open face was saying. She looked different. Her hair, which had always been pulled back in a severe, practical bun, was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She was wearing a simple sundress, a splash of yellow against the market's green, and she looked younger, lighter, 1,000 miles away from the intense, focused woman who had been his shadow for 5 years. She looked happy, free. Julian's chest tightened with a complex, unidentifiable emotion. It was a bitter cocktail of jealousy, regret, and a longing so sharp it felt like a physical wound. The man with her leaned in, offering her a piece of cheese on a cracker. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and Julian found himself analyzing the man with the same cold, critical eye he used to assess a new line cook. He was handsome in an unassuming, non-threatening way, the kind of man who probably had a golden retriever and a sensible savings plan, the kind of man who was everything Julian was not. Julian gripped his canvas tote bag, his knuckles white. Elena turned, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met across the sea of people and produce. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look he couldn't decipher. Shock, certainly, but there was something else there too, something that made his breath catch. The man beside her noticed her sudden stillness and followed her gaze, his eyes landing on Julian with a flicker of curiosity. He said something to Elena, but she just shook her head, her eyes still locked on Julian's. He felt as if he were being pulled into those familiar brown eyes, drowning in 6 months of unanswered question, of a kitchen that felt hollow and a life that felt off balance. All of it crashed over him at once. Elena murmured something to the man, who nodded, picked up their basket of goods, and headed toward the edge of the market. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her hand fluttering to her neck in a gesture he remembered from moments of high stress, and then she started walking toward him. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He set down his bag and waited, trying to assemble the shattered pieces of his composure into something resembling the man he was supposed to be, while his entire world tilted on its axis. "Julian," she said. Her voice was quieter than he remembered, but it still carried the same warmth that had been a low, steady flame in his chaotic world. "You look well. So do you." His throat felt tight, constricted. "You look happy." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I am, mostly." They stood there, 2 strangers in the middle of a bustling market, the air between them thick with the ghosts of 5 years. It felt as if no time had passed at all, as if they were back in the kitchen in the silent moments before service, the air crackling with unspoken potential. "How have you been?" she asked, and the sheer absurd normalcy of the question almost made him laugh, as if they were old colleagues catching up, not 2 people whose shared world had been ripped apart by a single piece of parchment paper. "Busy," he said, falling back on the familiar language of his life. "The summer menu is a challenge. We got a new review in the Times. Positive. I saw, she said, and his head snapped up. It was a great review. The dish with the heirloom tomatoes and the compressed watermelon sounded inspired. You've been following the restaurant. Her blush deepened. Old habits. It's hard to just stop caring. He wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. Where was she working? Was she happy? Did she ever miss the heat of the past, the pressure, the art of it all? Did she ever miss him? Who was the man with the easy smile? But what came out was, why did you leave? The question landed between them, raw and exposed, vibrating with 6 months of his own private, unanswered torment. Her eyes widened, and he saw her swallow hard. Julian, 6 months, he continued, his voice low, intense, the words spilling out, finally uncensored. For 6 months, I've been trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done better. You were the best sous chef I ever had, Elena. You were. He stopped himself before he said too much, before he admitted that she was more than his sous chef, that she was the only person who had ever truly understood him. I was what? He looked around the market, suddenly aware of the people around them, the curious glances. He was Julian Vance. He did not have personal, emotional conversations in public. The idea was as foreign to him as using a microwave. Can we talk? Somewhere else? He asked, hating the raw, desperate edge in his voice. She glanced toward the street where the man was waiting. He followed her gaze, and that tight, painful feeling in his chest returned, sharper this time. I can't. Mark is Mark. Julian repeated the name. It tasted bland, generic. He's my... She paused, and Julian held his breath, bracing himself at a word that would either shatter the last of his hope or offer a sliver of it. He's a friend. We're going to a picnic. Friend. The word loosened something inside him he hadn't even realized was clenched. Just a friend, not a boyfriend, not the man who got to hear her laugh every day. Please, Julian said, and the word felt like a surrender. 5 minutes. There's a coffee shop across the street. Elena looked torn, her gaze flickering between him and the street. He could see the battle on her face, politeness warring with self-preservation, curiosity battling with the pain he knew he had caused her. Elena! He stepped closer, invading her space, close enough to smell the faint, familiar scent of lavender and vanilla that always clung to her, a scent he associated with calm and competence and the feeling that everything, no matter how chaotic, was under control. I need to understand why. Her eyes searched his face, and he felt stripped bare under her gaze, as if she could see all the sleepless nights, the frustrating services, the gnawing emptiness that had taken up residence in his life since she'd left. Okay, she whispered, her voice so soft he almost missed it. 5 minutes. The relief was so intense it almost made him dizzy. She walked over to Mark, and Julian watched them speak in low tones. He couldn't hear the words, but he analyzed every gesture. Mark glanced over at him, his expression open, curious, not hostile. He nodded, gave Elena a brief, friendly hug, and then left with their basket. She returned, her expression guarded. There's a little cafe on the corner. They walked in silence, the city's noise a buffer between them. The cafe was small and crowded, filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and pastries. Julian ordered an espresso, black. He'd stopped taking it with the single lump of raw sugar he'd once preferred, though he couldn't pinpoint when or why. Elena ordered a chamomile tea, the same thing she used to drink at the end of a long service to calm her nerves. Some things, it seemed, never changed. They found a tiny table by the window, the city rushing past outside. Julian sat across from her, the small table feeling like a vast, empty chasm. He had no idea how to begin. How do you ask someone to explain the exact moment they decided to rip your world apart? You look tired, Elena said, breaking the silence. He almost laughed. He was bone tired. He'd been working with a manic, obsessive energy for 6 months, trying to fill the void she'd left with new dishes, new technique, new accolades, but it was like trying to satisfy a deep hunger with foam and air. I've been working, he said. The new sous chef he's not you. The words were out before he could stop them, raw, honest, and utterly unprofessional. Her gaze dropped to her teacup, her fingers tracing its rim. Julian, I need to know, Elena, what did I do wrong? Was I too hard on you? Too demanding? Did I push you too far? He leaned forward, his voice urgent. Because if I did something, No, her voice was firm, cutting through his spiral of self-recrimination. You never crossed a line. You were a brilliant chef to work for. Demanding, yes, but you pushed me. You made me better than I ever thought I could be. Then why? She was silent for a long moment, stirring her tea, the tiny spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. He watched her hands, those strong, capable hands that could butcher a whole fish with surgical precision or plate a dessert with the delicacy of a watchmaker. Some things are too complicated to explain in a kitchen, she said finally, her eyes still on her cup. Try me, he said, his voice softer, now coaxing. I'm a chef. I live for complicated. She finally looked up, and he saw a raw, vulnerable emotion in her eyes that stole his breath. It was a look of such profound sadness and longing that it felt like a physical blow. You really want to know? Yes. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and Julian felt as if the entire cafe, the entire city, was holding its breath with her. He knew with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty that whatever she was about to say would change everything. Because I'm in love with you. The words hit him with the force of a physical impact. He felt the air leave his lungs, felt his carefully constructed world of order and control shatter into a million unrecognizable pieces. The sounds of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations faded into a distant roar. He felt like he was underwater, the pressure immense, the silence profound. What? He managed to say, the word feeling clumsy and inadequate in his mouth. I'm in love with you, she repeated, her voice steadier this time, as if the first confession had broken a dam. I have been for a long time, maybe years. I don't know when it started, but I know when I realized it. It was during that terrible service the night the main water line broke. You were holding the entire kitchen together with sheer force of will, and I stayed all night. Not because you asked, but because I couldn't imagine you going through it alone. And I realized that what I felt for you wasn't just respect. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't about the food. It was love, a real, hopeless, impossible love. Julian just stared at her, his mind reeling, trying to process this new, world-altering piece of information. Elena was in love with him. All those shared looks across the past, all those late nights working on new menus, all those moments of unspoken connection. She had felt it too. You're in love with me, he repeated, the words feeling foreign, strange. And you quit because of that. Yes. Her voice was a whisper now. I couldn't do it anymore, Julian. I couldn't stand there night after night and pretend that working for you was just a job. Every time you smiled at me, my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Every time you went on a date with some beautiful food critic or writer, I felt like a piece of me was dying. I had to leave. Julian felt a flush of heat rise in his neck. He had dated, of course, a series of brief, shallow relationships that never went anywhere, that always felt lacking. He had never understood why until this exact moment. Elena, I knew it was impossible, she continued, the words tumbling out now a torrent of long-suppressed emotion. You're Julian Vance. You're a culinary genius. You live on a different plane than the rest of us. And I was just your sous chef, the person who executed your vision, who made sure the mise en place was perfect. You were never just anything, he said, the words more forceful than he intended, loaded with a meaning he was only just beginning to understand. Her eyes widened. What does that mean? He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. What did it mean? That he'd missed her more than he'd ever missed anyone? That no one had ever understood the language of his food, of his soul, the way she did? That sometimes, during those late nights, he'd found himself watching the curve of her lip as she tasted a sauce and wondered what it would be like to kiss her. I don't know, he said, the admission feeling like a failure. They sat in silence, the weight of her confession a tangible thing between them. His mind was a chaotic storm, replaying the last 5 years through this new lens, every memory, every interaction, suddenly cast in a different light. So now you know, she said finally, her voice small. That's why I left. Because loving you and pretending I didn't was breaking me. And I thought if I left I could stop. And did you? He asked, his voice raw. Her laugh was a short, bitter sound. What do you think? He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the exhaustion under her newfound freedom, the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted her teacup, the way her gaze kept darting toward the door. He saw the pain she had been carrying, a weight he had been too self-absorbed to notice. Elena, but she was already pushing her chair back, leaving her tea unfinished. I should go. Mark is waiting, and this was a mistake. Elena, wait. No, Julian, I shouldn't have told you. Her voice cracked just slightly. I wanted you to understand. I didn't want you to think it was your fault. It wasn't. It was mine. My feelings, problem. It's not a problem, he said, standing up too. Elena, please. But she was already walking away, moving quickly through the tables and out the door, disappearing into the city's afternoon crowd. Julian watched her go, frozen, the echo of her words, because I'm in love with you, reverberating through him. Elena Rostova was in love with him, had quit her job, had walked away from a career she was brilliant at because of it. He sank back into his chair, his espresso cold and untouched. He reached out and touched her teacup. It was still warm. His phone buzzed, a text from his new sous chef. Chef, the delivery from the farm is late. What should I do for the amuse-bouche? Julian stared at the message. He was supposed to go back to the kitchen to solve problems, to create, to lead. He was supposed to go back to his empty, perfectly ordered life and pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Elena Rostova was in love with him, and he, Julian Vance, the master of control, had no idea what to do. He sat in the cafe for another hour, long after Elena's tea had gone cold, trying to understand why her confession felt less like a shock and more like the missing ingredient in a dish he'd been trying to perfect his entire life. When he finally left, he walked slowly back to his restaurant, Elena's words echoing in his mind, and for the first time in 6 months, he allowed himself to wonder what would have happened if he had been brave enough to say them first. Julian didn't go back to the restaurant. Instead, he walked. He walked for hours aimlessly through the streets of the city that had become the backdrop to his ambition. He walked through neighborhoods he hadn't seen in years, past parks and storefronts and the anonymous, bustling lives of strangers. But he wasn't seeing any of it. He was seeing Elena. He saw her on their first day 5 years ago, a young, fiercely determined cook with more talent in her little finger than most chefs had in their entire bodies. He saw her during the brutal opening weeks of Aperture. The two of them working side by side for 20 hours a day, fueled by coffee and a shared unspoken obsession with creating something perfect. He saw her laughing, a rare, beautiful sight, after they'd won their 3rd Michelin star, the two of them sharing a bottle of cheap champagne in the empty kitchen long after everyone else had gone home. He told himself that what he felt for her was professional respect, admiration for her talent, gratitude for her loyalty. He was a master of deconstruction in the kitchen, but he had been a coward in his own heart, refusing to identify the most obvious ingredient of all. At 3 a.m., he found himself standing outside her apartment building. He didn't know how he'd gotten there, his feet seeming to have a memory and a will of their own. He stood across the street, staring up at the darkened windows, wondering which one was hers. Was she sleeping? Was she dreaming? Was she, like him, haunted by the ghost of a conversation in a cafe? He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact information. He'd never deleted it. He told himself it was a professional necessity in case of an emergency. Another lie. He started to type a text, then deleted it. What could he say? I'm standing outside your building like a stalker? I think I might be in love with you too, and it terrifies me. He was Julian Vance. He built empires of flavor and texture. He did not do this. He did not do messy, complicated human things. Defeated, he went home. His apartment, usually a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet order, felt like a prison. The silence was deafening. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to dull the sharp, chaotic riot of his thoughts. He thought of Elena saying she had to leave because watching him date other women was killing her. He thought of those women, critics, designers, artists, all brilliant and beautiful, all utterly wrong for him. They had admired his success, but they had never understood the sacrifice. They had never seen him at 3 a.m., exhausted and covered in flour, trying to perfect a new bread recipe. They had never understood that the restaurant wasn't just his job, it was his heart, his soul, his everything. But Elena had understood. Elena had been there. She had been a part of it all, and he had been too blind to see that she wasn't just a part of the restaurant. She was a part of him. He slept for 2 hours and woke up feeling raw and exposed. He went to the restaurant, moving on autopilot. The morning of prep was already underway. The familiar sounds of knives on boards and the low hum of the ovens doing little to soothe him. His new sous chef, David, approached him tentatively. Chef, about the amuse-bouche last night? It was fine, David, Julian said, his voice flat. It hadn't been fine. It had been technically perfect, but soulless. It had lacked Elena. He spent the morning in a fog, tasting sauces without really tasting them, reviewing orders without really seeing them. Every corner of the kitchen held a memory of her. The spot by the stove where she'd burned her arm and refused to leave the line. The small, cluttered corner of the office where she'd meticulously organized his recipes. The walk-in freezer where they'd once shared a look of pure, unadulterated panic when the door had jammed. At noon, his phone buzzed. It was an email from Elena. His heart stopped. The subject line was just one word: sorry. He opened it with trembling hands. Julian, I'm sorry about yesterday. It was unfair of me to put you in that position. My feelings are my own responsibility, and I never should have burdened you with them. I hope you can forget it happened. I wish you all the best. Elena. He read the email 3 times. She was letting him off the hook. She was giving him an easy out. She was, even now, trying to take care of him, to protect him from the messiness of her own heart. And it was in that moment that he finally understood. The anger, the frustration, the desperate need for control, it was all just fear. He was afraid of feeling something this powerful, this real. He was afraid of letting someone in. He was afraid of being happy. He walked out of the kitchen, ignoring David's confused calls of, "Chef?" He walked out the front door of the restaurant, into the bright, unforgiving light of day. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number before he could talk himself out of it. She answered on the second ring, her voice hesitant. "Hello? Don't apologize," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer name. "Don't you dare apologize." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Julian, you said you left because you were in love with me," he said, walking faster now, though he didn't know where he was going. "You said it was impossible." "It is," she whispered. "No, it's not," he said. "The most impossible thing, the thing that I haven't been able to figure out for the past 6 months, is how to run my kitchen, how to live my life without you in it." I was just too stupid and too scared to realize why. He heard her sharp intake of breath. What are you saying? He stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, oblivious to the people rushing past him. He closed his eyes and saw her face, her smile, her laugh. I'm saying, he began, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating, that you were never just my sous chef, and I was never just your boss, and I think I'm in love with you too. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. For a moment, he thought she had hung up. Elena, where are you? She asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. I don't know, he said, looking around at the unfamiliar street. Lost, I think. Stay there, she said. Don't move. I'm coming to find you. And as Julian stood there in the middle of a city that suddenly felt full of possibility, he realized that he had been lost for a very long time. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to be found. He was willing to risk everything, to throw away the rule book, to create a new recipe, one that wasn't about perfection, but about two people finding their way back to each other. For the first time, Julian Vance was ready to cook with his heart.